Good morning. We are reading The Wheel on the School by Meindert de Jong, pictures by Maurice Sendak. We are on Chapter 6, Elke and the Ancient Wheel. Elke's up in the hayloft, and he has a big old wheel, big old heavy wheel, tied to a rope around his chest, around an upright beam in the back of the barn, and he has just kicked it out the door. And that's where we left off. Behind Elke, the slack rope snaked and became taut. With a terrific yank, Elke was jerked off his feet. He fell backward, flat on his back. The flying rope dragged him through dust and stalks toward the upright beam. Elke had sense enough to put out his hands to keep from crashing headfirst into the beam. For a moment he clung to the smooth beam, but the speed of the falling wheel outside the barn jerked him around the beam, twisted him so that now he was flat on his face, and tore his hands free before he could get a secure hold. Elke shot across the hayloft floor toward the wide-open doorway. There was nothing to grab. He clutched wildly at the haystalks. There was nothing to slow him. Elke sprawled his legs wide in a desperate effort to slow himself. His hands clawed at the rope around his chest. He frantically tried to undo the knot. There was no time. There was the open doorway. Elke grabbed blindly and dug nails and fingers into the old dead wood of the door jamb. Somehow he held. The weight of the wheel spun him around. As he clung with his hands, his feet went out the doorway. For an unbelievable and horrible moment, Elke hung. His shoes flew off his feet, and because the moment seemed so long, it seemed to take time before he heard his shoes hit the hard-packed ground below. He scrabbled for a stronger, surer hold on the worn door jamb. Then a horrible yank shook through his whole body. The rope wasn't long enough. The wheel was hanging above the ground, hanging from him like an awful pendulum. The rope around his chest slipped down. There was a brief blind moment of hope that it would slip right down his dangling legs and off him, but the rope caught around Elke's thick waist. Elke hung by his fingers. Far below, suspended from him by the thick old rope, the wheel dangled against the wall of the barn. There were blinding short moments. There could not be many more moments. He could never hold the wheel, hanging as he was, by his hands. Elke closed his eyes. His breath retched out of him. All he could do was cling another moment of eternity, and if possible, yet another. At that point, the rope broke. The wheel crashed below. The strain was gone, the strain on his waist and clutching fingers. Suddenly there was breath again, and a feeling of heavenly lightness, as if he were flying, as if he could fly. And with new strength, Elke tugged himself up and dragged himself up through the doorway. When his legs were safely in the loft, he stretched full length in the dust and stalks and sobbed. He lay flat, his breath rattling out of him. It was good to lie and sob, never to have to stir again. Then Elke remembered the crashing sound the wheel had made. Slowly, timidly, flat on the floor, he put his head out of the doorway. He just lay and stared. There was the wheel, smashed into 100 pieces. Only the iron rim with its inside wooden rim had stayed together. The big hub had rolled away. The spokes lay scattered in every direction. Elke groaned. His narrow escape was forgotten in his utter disappointment. The wheel was all in pieces. Gone was the proud vision of rolling the wheel to the school. Elke slowly got up. He pulled the 2 hay doors shut and remembered to latch them. Without bothering to undo the piece of broken rope still knotted around his waist, he went down the long ladder, staring blank-faced at nothing. The wreckage was complete. Elke looked gloomily at the shattered wheel before him. He picked up his wooden shoes, examined them to see if they had split, then slid them onto his feet. He turned to go, but looked back. Could the wheel be put together again? He still had all the parts. He started gathering up the scattered spokes. They made a staggering armful. There was still the hub, and if he was to roll the rim away, he would need both his hands. Elke pondered. The rope still knotted around his waist provided a solution. One by one, he shoved the spokes under the tight rope around his waist until he was ringed by spokes. He had to walk very straight. He could hardly stoop to pick up the heavy hub. But what to do with the hub? He couldn't carry it in his hands, because his hands had to be kept free to roll the rim to shore. Walking stiffly in his clumsy corset of wheel spokes, Aelka went to the rope that lay over the rim. By jerking and snapping the old rope, he broke it. It unraveled and parted strand by strand. Now he had a short length of rope. He tied it around the hub, lowered the hub carefully over his shoulder, and tied the other end to the rope still knotted around his waist. There, that solved the problem of the hub. Now the rim. He could hardly reach down to it, encased as he was in wheel spokes. At last he got it off the ground and standing upright. And here he is, with his arrangement. Harnessed in spokes, the heavy hub unwieldy on his back, Aelka got the rim rolling. He trotted stiffly beside it. Down the farm lane, the wheel rim rolled very nicely. But on the rutted canal road, it developed a mean tendency to bump down into one of the two wagon ruts, or to hit pebbles and suddenly veer toward the deep canal. Aelka couldn't move quickly. He could only do one thing. Whenever the rim veered toward the canal, he knocked it flat before it could plunge into the water. The straining, struggling Aelka was soon drenched with sweat. He grunted and panted. But always he picked the rim up again and rolled it on, determined somehow to get it to school. He got better at managing the jumpy rim. He found that by keeping it in one of the deep wagon ruts of the canal road, the rut made sort of a track for the rim. Now he was beginning to make progress. The rim rolled down the rut. The loaded Aelka trotted beside. At this pace, they'd soon be in Shora. The iron rim, rolling beside Aelka, suddenly hit a big pebble in the rut and bounced up. To Aelka's relief, it bounced right back down into the rut. Then, all in one moment, the whole rim came apart. The inner wooden rim had come loose from the outer iron rim. The wooden rim had been made out of short-fitted sections, and now that one of the sections had let go, the whole rim fell to pieces. The sections clattered down and lay scattered along the road. Aelka stopped. He stood and stared in dismay at the trail of wooden rim sections. The outer rim rolled on by itself. There was a loud shout across the field. "Watch it! Watch that rim!" Aelka threw a startled glance at the field. It was Yella, running toward him and shouting. Aelka whirled toward the iron rim. It was too late to do anything. The rim had jumped out of the rut and had rolled across the road. There was a splash as the rim disappeared in the canal. Aelka's heart sank, but he ran to the canal. A stiff anger arose in him. If Yella hadn't shouted! He angrily undid the rope that held the heavy hub over his shoulder and let it drop. He looked at it as if he had a mind to kick it into the canal. Down the steep bank in the canal, the bottom mud came wheeling up where the iron rim had sunk. A few dirty bubbles came to the surface and broke. "Keep your eye on the spot and don't move," Yella came yelling across the road. "What'd you let it go in the canal for?" Aelka stared bitterly at the water. "It came apart," he managed to say. "It fell into pieces." He pointed to the trail of wooden rim sections on the road. Yella looked at the clouded water. "Is that where it went in?" Aelka nodded. All of a sudden he was too close to tears to trust his voice. He'd worked so hard, and now... Suddenly he was angry again. He hadn't noticed until now, but Yella had his bow with him. He even had arrows for it. Yella had been fooling around with the bow and arrows. But Aelka said nothing. Yella carefully laid the arrows down. Now he stretched flat on the bank and poked with his bow down into the murky water. He got on his hands and knees. "I can't reach it with my bow." He looked up at Aelka. "Can you swim?" "No. Can you?" "No, but I was thinking." Yella looked at Aelka encased in his wheel spokes, then at the hub lying on the canal bank. "Hey, you could let me down by the rope on that hub." For answer, Aelka picked up the rope and yanked at one end of the strands. The strand raveled apart and broke in his fingers. "Golly, no," Yella said. "I'd be for the fishes." "We've got to get help," Aelka said. "Yes, but then we'd maybe lose the spot where the rim went down." "Hey, I know," Yella exclaimed. "Look, we'll use those spokes you've got around you. We'll drive them into the canal bank like stakes, like a sort of ladder going down into the water. Then I can let myself down into the water by hanging from the bottom stake. I can feel with my toes for the rim. Look, we'll use that hub as a sort of sledgehammer to drive the stakes in." "That iron rim's awfully heavy," Elka said doubtfully. "You couldn't pull it up with your toes." But Yellow was so absorbed in his plan, he paid no attention. He untied the rope from the hub and drove the first spoke down into the perpendicular bank of the canal. A foot or so lower, he drove a second one. "Hand me another," he panted. He drove the third spoke into the bank. Then he couldn't reach any lower. "Your turn," Yellow said. "Look, I'll hold you by your ankles, and you can hang down the bank and drive in the lower spokes." It was almost impossible to drive stakes into the bank while hanging upside down. The blood rushed to Elka's head. The hub was almost too heavy to hold with one hand until he had the stake started so he could hammer at the stake with both hands. Elka managed to drive in a spoke. It scared him horribly when Yellow let go one leg and picked up a spoke to hand down to him. As Yellow stooped with the spoke, Elka slid a little farther down the bank, a little closer to the water. It unnerved him. He managed to tap the spoke into the bank with the hub, but everything swam before his eyes. I can't any more upside down," he said. The awkward hub slid from his nerveless hand, plunged in the canal, and disappeared. "Oh, you clumsy fathead!" Yellow angrily said as he dragged Elka up the bank. "Now the hub's gone too. Can't you ever do anything right?"